Gonzalo Lira was arrested in Ukraine for the second time on May 1st, 2023. He claims he was arrested because he's been denied his right of freedom of speech. But what he's not telling us is that he was arrested because after the February 24, 2022 Russian invasion, Ukraine passed a set of laws that penalizes anyone who engages in activities that could be considered to be collaborationism on behalf of the Russian Federation and their illegal invasion of Ukraine. Most of the people who defend Gonzalo Lira are using his arguments that Ukraine is not a real democracy because they restrict freedoms of speech. Well, I think this is a perfect time to talk about this issue. So, I invite you to watch the entire video and judge for yourself if Gonzalo Lira deserves to be in prison or not.
The Facts Hunter.
Facts. Gonzalo Lira was arrested because he broke a 2022 law that Ukraine adopted after the Russian invasion of February 24, 2022. The law in question is Law number 2108-Roman numeral 9, which I already covered in a previous video, and you're welcome to watch it if you like. But for the sake of brevity, in a nutshell, the law states punishment is introduced for public denial of Russian armed aggression against Ukraine, support for the actions of Russia, propaganda, and the transfer of material resources. Now, is Ukraine really a dictatorship for passing such laws? Is Ukraine trying to control people's brains and thoughts by regulating freedom of speech? Well, let's pull out a fact that needs to be explained before we pass judgment. Russia and Ukraine are engaged in a conflict that has not only been fought with weapons, but is also being fought monetarily and ideologically. Ideologically speaking, Putin wants to rebuild the old Soviet empire by controlling the few remaining states that were once considered to be part of the Soviet empire. Ukraine is one of those states. Whether you want to believe Ukraine triggered the invasion by flirting with the possibility of joining NATO or not, that's your own opinion. Me, personally, I'm of the belief that claiming that the Russian invasion is justified because Ukraine was planning on joining NATO is similar to blaming a woman after being raped by claiming she had it coming for dressing up slutty or behaving like a whore.
The idea is that Putin's hand in this invasion of 2022 was forced by the expansion of NATO.
Yeah, Lex, so let's imagine that a tragedy's happened here in New York and a woman got raped. We know the perpetrator. They go to trial, and Oliver Stone gets up and says, you know what? The woman was wearing a short skirt, and there was no option but for the rapist to rape her. The woman was wearing lipstick, or the woman was applying for NATO membership and just had to be raped. Didn't want to rape her, but was compelled because of what she was doing and what she looked like and the clothes she was wearing and the alliances that she was under international law, signed by Moscow, all the treaties, that sovereign countries get to choose whatever alliance they belong to.
The Russian invasion was unprovoked, period. But Russia wants to win the war at all costs and is using social media channels to change the minds of the public in their favor, which in turn will force the hand of the leadership in the West, and thus stop the economic help Ukraine is getting from the Western nations, along with the weapons and humanitarian assistance Ukrainian leadership desperately needs. So, in simple terms, Russia, under Putin's leadership, is weaponizing the Western freedoms of speech by inundating social media channels with propaganda. Now, I'm gonna quote a recent article from Politico, which is one of the most centrist sources of information I personally trust. Fox News is to the right, MSNBC is to the left, and Politico is right in the middle. June 13, 2023. Paris, France has uncovered a wide-ranging Russian disinformation campaign to undermine Western support to Ukraine. The country's agency in charge of spotting foreign interference online announced Tuesday. According to the agency Vigilion's report, the campaign consisted of spreading pro-Russian content impersonating media such as Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Le Parisien, as well as government websites including France's Ministry of European and Foreign Affairs, creating websites on Frankfurt news and polarizing angles, and coordinating fake accounts to spread the content created. The main narrative pushed by the disinformation campaigns are the inefficiency of sanctions against Russia, the alleged Russophobia of Western states, the supposed predominance of Nazi ideology among Ukrainian officials, and the negative effect of welcoming Ukrainian refugees for European countries. Now, imagine if in France, which is located thousands of miles away from the front lines, you have active Russian agents impersonating French media. Do you really think Ukraine is not going to try to stop Russian propaganda within their own borders? And the danger the spread of Russian propaganda presents to Ukraine is real. For example, during the first Republican primary presidential debate for the 2024 presidential election, the following question was asked.
Moving on to other issues. The U.S. has committed nearly $77 billion in aid to the Ukraine war. The administration is now asking Congress for $24 billion more. Regardless of that, the specifics of that plan, is there anyone on stage who would not support the increase of more funding to Ukraine?
Out of the 8 nominees, only 2 responded that they will not support financial aid to Ukraine: Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida, and tech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, this might not sound bad, 2 out of 8 is okay, except that at the end of the debate, the polls actually favor these 2 candidates over the rest of the nominees. Here is what The Hill had to say. In a Washington Post, Ipsos, and 538 poll of potential Republican voters who watched Wednesday's GOP debate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy came out on top. The poll showed 29 and 26% of the potential voters thought DeSantis and Ramaswamy performed best, respectively. So, after looking at these facts, one has to perform a mental exercise. If you were a leader of the Ukrainian government, would you let Russian propagandists within your own borders exercise their freedom of speech, knowing pretty well that if their message gains enough support, the Western aid you're receiving could actually end? Of course not.
The Russians are saying, oh, it's no big deal, no big deal. They tend to do that. They tend to minimize their own losses or casualties. They never tell a lie, the Russians, at least the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What they will do is they will tell the truth or they will omit some information available. So that I don't have a problem with. What I do have a problem with is outright lying, which is what the Zelensky regime invariably does.
A country that is engaged in an existential conflict such as war will restrict freedoms for its citizens in order to operate at that optimal state. And this happens all the time, at different levels of severity. Propaganda is a real threat to a country in war. One controversial example of this happening took place during World War II. One of the darkest pages in American history was the action that the American government took by imprisoning thousands of American citizens of Japanese descent in concentration camps. Now, this is puzzling. How can a country like Japan spread propaganda to Japanese people living in America? Well, it happened during the first days when America was dragged into the war by Japan. As a matter of fact, it happened right after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The incident in question is known as the Niihau Incident. It is a dramatic event that is not widely known, but I personally believe that it was crucial in the decision to put thousands of Japanese Americans in concentration camps during the Second World War. Now, to be perfectly clear, I am not saying that what the United States did was justified. What I'm saying is that during times of war, a country will take drastic measures when exposed to potential threats. I'm going to give a very oversimplified recount of events. If you'd like to learn more about the Niihau Incident, there are a lot of great videos about this subject on YouTube. But in a nutshell, here is the story. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. After the unprovoked attack on the naval base, a Japanese pilot had to do an emergency landing on the Hawaiian island of Niihau. The residents of the island were not aware of the war, as they lived isolated from the rest of the world since they had no direct communication with the rest of civilization. The only form of media they had at the time was a transistor radio that was rarely used. So, as it was their custom, the residents treated the pilot as a guest with hospitality and care. After the locals became aware of the Pearl Harbor attack via the transistor radio, they restrained the pilot by locking him up until he could be handed over to the appropriate authorities. The pilot only spoke Japanese, so in order to communicate with him, the residents requested the help of the only 3 locals of Japanese descent who could help with translation. However, when the pilot talked to the 3 Japanese locals, he managed to persuade one of the 3 to help him overtake the island and turn it into occupied territory controlled by the Japanese Empire. Needless to say, it didn't turn out well for the 2 Japanese aggressors. The pilot was killed by a local hero, and the pilot's assistant killed himself knowing that he made the wrong decision and that he would probably be hanged for treason to the nation. So the point of this story is that we have historical proof that propaganda is an actual weapon of war. In the case of the Niihau Incident, you have a Japanese pilot who managed to brainwash a gullible mind into turning against his own country. And here are the key factors. The local Japanese descendant was Yoshio Harada, a second-generation Japanese American who was born in Hawaii, a paradise by all means. He was living on the island with his wife, Irene Harada, completely isolated from the outside world, just working on the local ranch without a care in the world. All of a sudden, a Japanese pilot lands on the island, and when the 2 talk, the pilot tells all kinds of Japanese propaganda. The pilot told Yoshio Harada that the Japanese were winning the war, that soon America will fall to the Japanese Empire, and that he needed to help him escape because it is a dishonor for a Japanese soldier to be captured by the enemy. After the Niihau Incident took place, the government caved in to fears that Japanese propaganda could actually turn Americans against their own country. And because of one Japanese pilot, thousands of Japanese Americans were placed into concentration camps. Yeah, one Japanese pilot was exercising his freedom of speech, and thousands paid the price. But to be fair, there are people who claim that the Niihau Incident had nothing to do with the concentration camps. People like George Takei, a celebrated actor who was one of the poor souls that suffered imprisonment, wrote on his book that he doesn't believe in the connection between the incident and the camp. He has a couple of arguments that back up his claims, but all things being equal, the Niihau Incident is a clear case where we can witness the power of propaganda during times of war. The danger of propaganda is real. Putin knows this pretty well. That's why he arrests anybody who even dares to call the conflict in Ukraine a war instead of a special military operations. That's why he is sending operatives to Western countries like France to build misinformation campaigns. Ukraine also knows the danger of propaganda. That's why they passed a law to eliminate such danger.
My case is all about free speech. I was accused of being a pro-Russian propagandist, basically, cut through the legalese, it was basically that. And perhaps I did not emphasize this enough in my videos, but the purpose of my videos was to point out how horrifying the war was, how detrimental to the Ukraine people and the Ukrainian nation it was, and the only solution was to find a peace settlement of some sort, of any sort, to prevent the complete destruction of the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian people. Well, that happened. About a third of the population of Ukraine has left the country. 20% of it is controlled and will be annexed by the Russians, and there's no doubt in my mind that they intend to capture much more territory of the Ukraine nation, probably up to the Dnieper River, and take everything east of it, and that will include Odessa, of course, and Ukraine will be broken. It's inevitable at this point, unfortunately.
Gonzalo Lira was arrested for spreading propaganda in a country during times of war. Personally, I believe Gonzalo knew that what he was doing could get him in trouble. But this is the thing. When Gonzalo was posting his videos, he was earning thousands of dollars from donations via YouTube and Patreon. At one point, he was earning around $6,000 a month from Patreon alone. He had over 230 subscribers who paid $25 each to hear his lies. Will it be crazy to assume that Gonzalo adopted a feeling of empowerment because he was earning thousands of dollars hand over fist by just spreading Kremlin narratives? At the time of his arrest, he was writing a book that he was planning on publishing, possibly earning him hundreds of thousands of dollars. And just like the Japanese pilot, he believed that America and the West will fall and that the new world order will favor him and bring him glory. Propaganda is a real weapon. In our present times, that Japanese pilot who brainwashed and caused the death of innocent Americans has a memorial stone with his name in Japan, honoring his actions. At the same time, the Japanese government wants to whitewash the crimes the Japanese army inflicted during the war, trying to erase their ugly past as if it never existed. In Russia, Putin is rebuilding memorials honoring Stalin, whitewashing the crimes that dictator committed and brainwashing the new Russian generations into believing that Stalin was a good man, that he never killed millions of Russians, and that expanding the Russian Empire is the only way to survive against the evil West. So in conclusion, was Gonzalo Lira unfairly arrested for exercising his freedom of speech by spreading Russian propaganda? You, dear viewers, are welcome to make your own minds. Write comments down below and share your opinions. In the meantime, that's it for me. Thank you for watching. I'm a Facts Hunter. Have a good time and take care.